Hey guys! Tonight we journey back to a world where the sun was more than just an inconvenience. It was a ruthless tyrant, a daily tormentor that dictated how people lived, worked, ate, and even slept. Forget air conditioning, iced lattes, or the ability to hide inside a temperature-controlled bubble. Imagine staring up at a sky so pitilessly clear it felt like a magnifying glass held over an ant colony. And guess what? You were the ant. This was life for countless ancient families who had nothing but mud, straw, and a lot of stubborn determination to stand between themselves and the relentless elements. So, before we dive headlong into this saga of sweat, dust, and architectural improvisation, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and maybe even drop a comment telling me where you are right now and what time it is, because time, light, and heat meant something very different to people in the ancient world. And if you're listening at night, go ahead and dim the lights. Maybe keep a fan humming in the background. It's the perfect way to slip into the atmosphere of this story. You'll need that fan, by the way, because what we're about to uncover is the very definition of hot and cold extremes. Now let's get rid of the picture book fantasy. When we imagine ancient homes, it's easy to conjure something cozy. Rustic courtyards with potted plants, clay ovens puffing gently with the smell of fresh bread, families lounging peacefully on woven mats. But that postcard image is like Instagram with filters cranked up. It hides the reality. The truth is harsher, stranger, and far more fascinating. These were houses made of mud, literally the earth beneath your feet, slapped together with straw, water, and a lot of wishful thinking. And yet, against all odds, they worked. They endured brutal summers that could fry your skin and winters that could gnaw straight through your bones. Think about it. Walls that weren't carved from stone or cut from lumber, but shaped from sludge, mixed by hand or foot, molded in wooden frames, left to dry under the very sun they were supposed to protect you from. It sounds primitive because it was, but it was also genius. Thick, heavy, and surprisingly effective, these bricks kept interiors cooler than you'd expect by day and at least tolerably warmer by night. But don't romanticize it too quickly. You weren't exactly lounging in comfort. These houses demanded constant repair, constant vigilance, and a tolerance for discomfort that would make even the most hardcore minimalists today weep into their organic linen sheets. Step inside one of these dwellings and forget notions of wide-open living rooms and tidy layouts. You'd find cramped spaces, tiny windows, or no windows at all, and air so heavy with smoke, dust, and sweat that you'd feel like you were breathing through a damp rag. Roofs were flat, doubling as both extra storage space and the summer bedroom when interior rooms turned into ovens. Families sprawled out on mats under the stars, swatting away insects, listening to jackals howl in the distance, and praying that a sudden desert wind wouldn't dump half the Sahara onto their sleeping faces. Romantic stargazing? Sure, if you ignored the sand in your teeth. But here's the wild thing. People didn't just survive in these conditions. They built entire civilizations with mud brick homes as their foundation. Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, name a cradle of civilization, and there's mud under its fingernails. These houses weren't just shelters. They were the backdrop to births, marriages, feasts, quarrels, and funerals. They were witnesses to centuries of resilience. And while modern people panic if the Wi-Fi drops for 5 minutes, ancient families were managing entire lifetimes inside structures that could literally melt in the rain. As you picture all this, remember the sheer audacity it took to call such a fragile structure home. You weren't locking the door at night with a satisfying click. At best, you shoved a wooden bar into place and hoped nobody was desperate enough to kick through a wall. Privacy was non-existent. Sanitation was questionable, and the line between comfort and misery was as thin as the shade cast by your courtyard wall at noon. Still, people adapted. They crafted routines, rituals, and strategies that made life in mud brick houses not just survivable, but by their standards, normal. And that's where our journey begins. From here, we're going to step deeper into those sun-baked alleys, climb those fragile ladders, peer into smoky kitchens, and see how mud, sweat, and human stubbornness combine to defy the relentless sun and the biting cold. No grand conclusions yet, just the beginning of a long walk through the dust and into the daily lives of those who called mud brick houses home. Step further into the world of mud brick homes, and the first thing that slaps you in the face, quite literally, is the air. Hot, thick, unmoving, like being wrapped in a wool blanket straight out of the oven. Forget the modern luxury of cross ventilation or ceiling fans. Windows were rare, and when they existed, they were tiny slits, more useful for keeping thieves out than letting breezes in. Imagine spending an afternoon in a windowless box, walls radiating stored heat, smoke from a cooking fire curling around your head. Breathing was an act of willpower. If you wanted relief, you climbed up to the roof, but even there, the sun had baked the mud flat into a griddle. Choices were limited. Roast inside, sizzle outside. But this wasn't accidental. Those tiny windows and thick walls were deliberate. They were survival strategies, crude but effective. A narrow slit might not invite much breeze, but it also didn't invite much sunlight. Heat came in like a battering ram. The people who built these houses learned to shrink the doorway. It was less, let's decorate with natural light, and more, let's not cook alive before dinner. Thick walls absorbed the day's fury and released it slowly, like a thermal sponge. Step close to the wall with your hand pressed against it. You'd feel yesterday's sun still whispering through the mud. That constant cycle of baking and bleeding warmth was both curse and salvation. Daily life adapted around this architecture. Work in the home was scheduled to dodge the sun's tantrums. Early mornings saw courtyards buzzing with activity, grinding grain, fetching water, kneading dough, repairing cracks in the plaster before the heat stiffened the mud like stone. By noon, houses fell eerily quiet. Families retreated into whatever shade they could find, napping or waiting out the hours until evening cooled the air enough for activity again. Night wasn't just the time to sleep, it was the second half of the day, when work resumed, meals were prepared, and stories were told by lamplight. Life was built around the rhythm of the sun, not the clock, and your house was both a shield and a prison. Inside, you wouldn't find much decoration. Forget posters, framed pictures, or shelves of trinkets. Walls were blank, sometimes coated with a thin layer of white plaster to reflect what little light could be trapped inside. Floors were tamped earth, maybe covered with reed mats if you were lucky. Furniture was minimal. A low table, some stools, maybe a chest or two. Everything else was the ground itself. Sit, eat, sleep. Most of it happened at floor level. The house wasn't meant to pamper. It was meant to contain. And in that containment, daily life unfolded. Families clustered tightly. A single room might house parents, children, and even extended relatives, all stacked together like sardines with sandals. Privacy was not a concept. Conversations, arguments, laughter, even silence seeped through thin walls and open courtyards. You knew when your neighbor sneezed, when their bread burnt, when their donkey decided to serenade the entire block at midnight. Some might call it community, others might call it torture. Either way, it was unavoidable. And yet, there was resilience in that claustrophobia. The house became more than just walls. It was the center of identity. Children grew up tracing the cracks in plaster. Women memorized every draft and every weak spot in the roof. Men knew which corner needed the next mud patch before the rains arrived. Homes weren't just structures, they were biographies. Each repair told a story. Each stain, each smoke mark, each groove worn into the threshold was history etched in earth. Food preparation added another dimension to the experience. A hearth in the corner or a clay oven pressed against the courtyard wall meant that your house was always infused with smells. Burning dung cakes, charred bread edges, boiling lentils. Forget air freshener. The scent of survival clung to everything. Your clothes, your hair, even your skin. It was less home sweet home and more home smoky home. But without those fires, without those ovens, there was no food. Families worked with what they had, grinding grain into flour by hand, kneading dough until their arms ached, cooking bread that might be scorched one day and underdone the next. The house was their bakery, their smokehouse, their everything. And above it all, the roof remained the true stage of domestic life. Climb up the ladder in the evening, mats under your arm, and you'd find neighbors doing the same. Roofs turned into sleeping porches, gossip hubs, storage spaces, even workstations for drying crops. Under the stars, houses blurred into one another as families sprawled across flat surfaces, talking, arguing, laughing, and sometimes just lying silently while the night cooled the mud beneath them. The roof was freedom, however fragile, a place where the suffocating box below opened up into infinite sky. But don't think of it as peaceful. Mosquitoes, sudden gusts of sand, the occasional falling drunk uncle from a neighboring roof. Life was never dull. So step inside one of these mud brick homes. Breathe the smoky air. Feel the heat pressing against your skin. Hear the chorus of donkeys and neighbors in the background. And ask yourself, how did people not just endure this, but thrive here? The answer lies not just in their architecture, but in the rhythm of their lives, the stubbornness of their culture, and the way they learned to bend with the sun without ever breaking. If you linger a little longer inside these mud brick houses, one thing quickly becomes clear. The walls were never just barriers. They were living participants in the household, soaking up every season, every breath, every ounce of labor poured into them. Stand close, and you can almost feel the history pressed into the mud. The fingerprints of builders long gone, the straw fibers poking out like veins. These walls were thick, sometimes more than half a meter, and that thickness was their greatest weapon against the climate. By day, they absorbed the sun's rage. By night, they slowly exhaled the heat, leaving rooms just tolerable enough to let families rest. It wasn't comfortable by any modern standard, but it was a kind of rough equilibrium between man and nature. Still, those same walls were fragile. Rain could undo them in days. A sudden storm didn't just mean damp floors. It meant watching your house literally dissolve back into mud. That's why roofs extended slightly beyond walls, why plastering became a ritual as important as cooking or weaving. Families smeared fresh clay over cracks the way we might touch up peeling paint. Except in this case, failure wasn't cosmetic, it was catastrophic. Neglect your wall too long, and it might lean, sag, or collapse entirely. Imagine patching your living room just to prevent it from becoming a pile of sludge. That was life, repeated year after year, generation after generation. The very layout of these houses reflected this constant negotiation with environment. Rooms clustered around courtyards, with narrow alleys winding between blocks like veins in a body. The courtyard wasn't just extra space, it was the beating heart of the home. There, bread ovens smoked, jars of water cooled in the shade. Children tumbled in the dust, and adults found a scrap of light that wasn't filtered through a slit of a window. Without the courtyard, the house was a cave. With it, there was at least one place to breathe. Water defined everything. Imagine hauling it daily, clay jars banging against your hips as you trudged back from a canal or well. Every drop mattered, so houses were designed to store it in ingenious ways. Clay basins were dug into floors, jars were buried up to their necks to keep contents cool, and runoff was carefully guided away from walls to prevent erosion. The house was a thirsty creature. You fed it water to mix plaster, to smooth floors, to keep dust down. At the same time, too much water was deadly, capable of undoing weeks of labor in a single night. It was a relationship both intimate and hostile, like living with a roommate you couldn't live without and couldn't ever trust. Inside, life was raw and constant. Meals weren't served at a neat dining table, but cooked and eaten in whatever corner worked that day. Smoke blackened ceilings, tiny oil lamps dripped soot, and the smell of dung fuel blended with boiling grain until it was impossible to separate one from the other. Yet, in that smoky haze, families gathered, shared bread, and told stories. Walls weren't painted with murals, they were painted with memory. The rhythm of grinding grain, of mothers shaping dough, of fathers patching plaster, of children weaving mats, all of it became the soundtrack of a life lived in Earth's embrace. What strikes you most when imagining this world is the intimacy. In houses this small, with walls this porous, no secret was safe. Quarrels rang out into alleys, laughter bounced across courtyards, and the entire neighborhood became a single extended family, whether you wanted it or not. Privacy wasn't just scarce, it was almost non-existent. You lived your life not only under the watchful eye of your relatives, but under the ear of your neighbors. Gossip was inevitable. A burnt loaf, a collapsed roof corner, a child's cry in the night. It all became public property. And yet, there was comfort in that closeness. When a wall crumbled, neighbors came with baskets of mud. When illness struck, someone fetched water or herbs. A house may have been fragile, but the community it belonged to was the glue that kept it standing. Each dwelling was part of a greater whole, a tessellation of mud and humanity pressed together in the face of nature's indifference. By nightfall, the same walls that suffocated you by day became protectors. Shadows stretched long across the courtyard. Oil lamps flickered, and roofs filled with the murmur of families laying down mats. The stars stretched endlessly overhead, brilliant and sharp in the desert sky, a constant reminder of both insignificance and resilience. The house never let you forget the balance, fragile but enduring, flawed but necessary. And as you lay against its plastered walls, feeling the stored heat fade slowly into the cool of night, you knew that tomorrow would bring the same cycle again. Sunrise, labor, repair, survival.
Walk up a narrow staircase of packed earth, and you'd find yourself on the roof, a place as important as any room below. For many families, the roof was a second home, an escape from the cramped, smoky interiors. By day, it served as a workshop where women dried grain on reed mats or spread freshly molded mud bricks in the sun, letting them harden into the very material that kept their lives standing. Children clambered across beams, chasing each other dangerously close to the edges, while men repaired cracks with fresh plaster, sometimes cursing the unrelenting heat that forced them up there in the first place. By night, the roof transformed into a dormitory under the open sky. Families dragged mats outside, praying for a breeze to carry away the day's heat. Looking up at the Milky Way, they probably didn't think in poetic terms. They were too busy sweating and swatting insects. Yet for us, it's easy to imagine that lying there, sandwiched between mud below and stars above, must have felt like sleeping inside the universe's unfinished blueprint. The roof was also a stage for rituals both ordinary and sacred. Clay ovens perched near edges where smoke could escape. Pots bubbled with stews that absorbed the scent of open air, and sometimes small shrines sat tucked in corners, dedicated to household gods who hopefully wouldn't let the roof cave in during a storm. If the courtyard was the heart of the home, then the roof was its lungs, expanding, breathing, taking in the world beyond the claustrophobic walls. It connected people to the sky, which was no small thing in a land where the heavens dictated everything: planting, harvesting, worship, even survival. From above, the settlement stretched out like a quilt of mud squares, stitched together by alleys so narrow that two donkeys passing might jam the flow of traffic. And here's the thing, this wasn't a sloppy accident. It was deliberate urban engineering, honed over centuries. The tight packing of houses wasn't just about limited space, it was about insulation. One wall leaned on another, one roof shaded the next, and the entire neighborhood became a giant, interconnected cooling system. Walk those alleys at noon, and you'd notice the shadows pooling, the air heavy but less murderous than out in the open. Urban design wasn't drafted by architects, it was dictated by necessity, sculpted by the brutal choreography of sun and wind.
Trade and economy seeped into these mud brick grids as well. Roofs doubled as warehouses, where jars of barley and baskets of dates were stored, waiting to be bartered in the market. Merchants navigated alleys, calling out their wares, while children learned arithmetic, not from school, but from watching their parents count measures of grain. The house wasn't an isolated pod, it was a node in a living network. You couldn't separate domestic life from civic life because they were physically fused together, brick against brick, life against life. And while mud seemed humble, even disposable, it demanded constant skill to manage. The process of brick-making was communal theater. Men stomped clay with bare feet in shallow pits, mixing in straw, while children fetched water from canals and women laid out wet bricks in rows to dry. It wasn't just construction, it was choreography, a seasonal dance repeated endlessly. Every brick carried the memory of hands that shaped it, of laughter, complaints, songs hummed to distract from labor. You didn't just live in your house, you literally built it with your body, and you rebuilt it constantly. That blurred line between dwelling and dweller is something modern housing rarely achieves. Fire was always the enemy lurking in the background. Dry reed roofs, brittle wooden beams, oil lamps, every ingredient for disaster was right there. A single spark could leap across alleys and erase a dozen homes overnight. Yet people still lit fires, still cooked, still carried on, because what choice did they have? Fear of collapse, fear of rain, fear of fire. It was all baked into the daily experience. To us, it might sound like living in constant anxiety, but for them, it was just Tuesday. Survival was so routine, it barely needed to be remarked upon. And somehow, in the cracks of that fragility, beauty persisted. A wall might bear a child's handprint pressed into wet plaster, preserved like a fossilized giggle. Roof edges might be decorated with simple geometric patterns scratched into the mud, proof that even in poverty, people sought to leave a mark, however small. Life wasn't just endurance, it was expression, carved and molded in the same medium that threatened to crumble at any moment. Mud was both jailer and canvas. So, when you picture those communities from above, a sprawl of roofs glittering faintly under moonlight, alleys buzzing with voices, courtyards glowing with lamplight, you're not seeing ruins. You're seeing a kind of genius, imperfect, fragile, messy genius, A civilization that stared down a merciless sun and said, "Fine, we'll build with dirt and we'll make it last." If you stepped inside one of these homes at dawn, you'd catch a rhythm already in motion. Women grinding grain with stone querns, the rasping sound carrying through the plastered walls like a heartbeat of the household. The smell of fresh bread clung to everything, smoky, yeasty, earthy, rising from clay ovens tucked into corners. Men, often having returned from irrigation fields or workshops, wiped sweat from their brows before the sun was even fully awake. Children darted about, barefoot, their chatter bouncing off walls, their games weaving seamlessly into chores. Domestic life wasn't a background hum. It was the very engine that kept the mud brick organism alive. Water, the most precious guest in this house of dust, was fetched daily in clay jars. It sloshed over shoulders, spilled across floors, absorbed instantly into thirsty bricks. Without constant replenishment, not only would people suffer, but their homes would too. Mud walls depended on careful management of moisture. Too dry and they cracked, too wet and they melted. Every trip to the canal or cistern wasn't just about survival for the body. It was survival for the architecture itself. The house was, in a strange way, just another family member needing to be fed and tended. Objects filled these spaces with quiet testimony. Reed mats rolled across earthen floors, providing a buffer from dust and heat. Pottery, with its practical curves, doubled as decoration when light struck its polished surfaces. Tools leaned in corners, their wear marks proof of endless repetition. Each scratch on a blade or chip on a pot was a biography in miniature. This wasn't minimalism, it was necessity. There was no separation between the utilitarian and the aesthetic. Life was lived in full view of the tools that sustained it. Walls themselves bore the marks of humanity. Coated with fresh plaster every season, they carried layers like tree rings. Scratch one surface, and you might find red ochre pigment from a forgotten mural or a child's doodle etched in with a stick. Archaeologists today marvel at these faint ghosts, but to the people who made them, they were as ordinary as leaving a fingerprint on wet cement. Nothing about these houses was meant to last forever, yet paradoxically, they preserved more of daily life than the marble palaces of kings. Mud was mercifully honest. It held on to what people pressed into it, whether deliberate or accidental. The air inside was thick with contrasts. Cool pockets lingered in shaded corners, while the heat of cooking fires made kitchens feel like miniature suns. The smell of dung fuel mixed with that of boiling lentils, creating a bouquet only survivable through familiarity. Insects flitted around, tolerated with the resigned patience of people who had bigger problems than flies. Light entered sparingly, filtered through doorways or small windows, never quite conquering the shadows. Every beam of sunlight felt precious, painting stripes across walls and momentarily making the mud glow like gold. For all its gloom, the house could be startlingly beautiful when the sun struck it just right. And then there was sound. Roosters crowing from rooftops. Donkeys braying in alleys. Neighbors shouting greetings or insults depending on the day's mood. The house was porous in every sense. Walls blocked vision, but not noise. Privacy was a fantasy, a luxury of people with thicker barriers. Your quarrels, your laughter, your songs, they all seeped outward, stitched into the communal fabric. The mud brick home wasn't just yours, it was part of the neighborhood's chorus, a note in the unending music of survival. Despite fragility, these houses adapted endlessly. Need more space? Slap another room onto the side. Family growing? Add another floor. Roof collapsing? Rebuild it with fresh bricks and curses. The architecture was elastic, mirroring the cycles of life itself. Birth, marriage, death, all of it unfolded within these mutable walls. In a single lifetime, a house might be built, collapse, rebuilt, remodeled, and finally abandoned, its bricks recycled into someone else's future. Permanence was never the point. Continuity was. At night, when oil lamps flickered in niches carved into the walls, the house seemed to breathe differently. Shadows danced across plaster, transforming ordinary objects into looming silhouettes. Stories were told then, myths passed down, jokes cracked, secrets whispered. The mud didn't judge, it listened, absorbing not only heat and sound, but memory. Generations lived and died within these compact spaces, their voices layering invisibly, waiting for the rare archaeologist millennia later to wonder at what was once so ordinary. That ordinariness is what makes these homes astonishing. They weren't designed by master architects, nor adorned with the grandeur of monuments. Yet they sustained civilizations through scorching summers and freezing nights, shaping every breath, every step, every dream of the people inside. If you want to understand ancient life, don't start with palaces. Start with mud. Start with the walls that crumbled every season and were built again, stubborn as the people who called them home. Imagine the summer sun pressing down at noon. Outside, the streets are almost unbearable, light bouncing off pale mud surfaces until everything feels like it's glowing hot. Step inside a house and the contrast hits you. Not cool like an air-conditioned lobby, but a noticeable relief, as if the mud itself pulls the heat into its body. Thick walls act like sponges, delaying the assault of the day until later. It's not luxury, but it's the kind of margin that decides whether you faint in the afternoon or make it through chores without collapsing.
Heat management was a full-time occupation, not an afterthought. Roofs were often flat, doubling as sleeping platforms during summer nights. Families dragged mats and blankets upward, chasing the faintest breeze. Up there, the stars spilled across the sky with a brilliance lost to our polluted cities. Dogs barked, babies cried, lovers whispered, all beneath a canopy so vast it felt closer than the ground beneath. Privacy vanished, replaced by the shared vulnerability of bodies sprawled under the same relentless sky. Yet people adapted. The rooftop was as much a bedroom as the rooms below, only with fewer walls and more gossip from the neighbors.
Inside, air movement was engineered through simplicity. Small openings high in walls allowed hot air to drift out, while narrow doorways minimized direct sunlight. Courtyards, even tiny ones, became essential lungs for the house, drawing breezes and giving families space to breathe. You can picture it: herbs drying on ropes, children chasing each other in circles, chickens scratching at the dirt. The courtyard was chaos and sanctuary at once, proof that even in cramped clusters of mud, humans carved out space for life to unfold.
The sun, though feared, was also harnessed. Roof surfaces became drying racks for grains, dates, and figs. Fishermen spread their catch to cure under its glare, trusting that the same star that threatened them could also preserve food for leaner days. Mud itself was born of sun and water. Fresh bricks were set out to bake, rows of glistening blocks transforming from malleable clay into solid building units under an unforgiving gaze. Families spent days monitoring this process, praying for steady weather. A sudden storm could dissolve hours of labor into a slurry, mocking human ambition. Every house was literally baked into existence by the same power that threatened to undo it.
Winters brought their own games of survival. Those same walls that held back summer's fury became allies against icy winds. Fires burned in simple hearths, smoke crawling up vents or drifting lazily into rooms. People huddled close, wrapped in textiles woven from wool or flax, bodies pressed together for warmth. Nights stretched long, punctuated by coughing, laughter, and the endless cracking of wood or dung fuel. The mud held heat clumsily, releasing it quickly, so tending flames became an obsession. Let them die too early, and the chill crept in like a thief, gnawing at fingers and toes. Children likely saw the cold as an invitation to mischief. Barefoot races in frosty courtyards, chasing each other until the chill bit too hard. Parents scolded them back inside, shaking heads, knowing full well they once did the same. Domestic rhythms bent with the seasons, alternating between strategies of shade and strategies of fire. In both, the mud brick house was never passive. It was partner, adversary, and stage all at once. Sound changed with the seasons, too. In summer, windows open, life spilled outward. You could hear the grind of grain and the laughter of neighbors 2 houses down. In winter, doors shut tight, silence took hold. Voices echoed in smaller spaces, whispers amplified, secrets harder to keep. The very acoustics of survival changed with temperature, an intimate reminder that architecture is never neutral. It dictates what you hear, how you move, even how you think. Through all of this, resilience wasn't heroic. It was mundane. People didn't marvel every morning at their cleverness in surviving heat or cold. They just woke, cursed the weather, adjusted routines, and kept going. That's the real miracle. Not that they endured extremes, but that they did so with an unremarkable stubbornness. Every mat dragged to the roof, every jar filled with water, every fire stoked at midnight. Tiny rituals layering into centuries of continuity.
Step into the workshop corner of a mud brick neighborhood, and the hum of survival takes on a new tone. This wasn't just about sleeping, eating, or hiding from the weather. These houses also doubled as places of labor. Potters spun clay into bowls and jars that would later be stacked against the same walls, drying in patches of sunlight before firing. Looms clattered as women worked threads into textiles, weaving patience into every line. The house was never just a house. It was a factory, a marketplace, and a school, all rolled into one. Every square cubit rung for purpose.
Storage was everywhere, often in forms so ordinary they vanish from the imagination until you stand in one of these spaces. Large storage jars, called pithoi, were half buried in floors, their gaping mouths sealed with clay lids. Grain, dates, oil, beer, these weren't luxuries, they were lifelines. Open a jar and you'd smell not only the harvest, but the gamble of survival. Would it last the season? Would rats, mold, or thieves get to it first? The house was a vault, and every crack in its walls was a potential breach.
Tools and goods circulated in ways that blurred the line between domestic and economic life. A neighbor might pop by, not for a chat, but to borrow a sickle or trade a pot of beer for some extra flour. Debt, friendship, obligation, all of it tracked across thresholds worn smooth by countless feet. A house wasn't a private castle, it was a node in a dense web of exchange. The mud brick walls enclosed family, yes, but they also tied that family to every other one in the alley. Children absorbed these rhythms almost by osmosis. They learned by watching how to patch a crack with wet clay, how to balance a jar on their hip without spilling, how to read the moods of adults who were always balancing work and survival. Education didn't happen in a classroom. It happened as hands were guided over tools, as voices scolded or praised, as mistakes turned into lessons faster than a teacher could write them. Every brick wall was a blackboard, every courtyard a workshop.
Religious life seeped into the house as naturally as dust. Small altars tucked into niches, figurines placed discreetly on shelves, offerings left in corners. A pinch of grain, a smear of beer, a whispered prayer before sleep. The divine wasn't confined to temples. It lived in these rooms, in gestures so routine they didn't feel ceremonial. The gods were roommates as much as protectors, inhabiting mud and plaster alongside their human counterparts.
Illness lurked too, another constant resident. Thick walls didn't stop parasites, and crowded rooms made sure diseases traveled fast. A cough wasn't just a cough, it was a warning bell. Remedies were improvised, a mixture of herbs, poultices, and sheer hope. Healers might visit, muttering incantations as much as applying treatments. Sometimes it worked, often it didn't. The mud house was both shield and trap, sheltering families from the elements, but amplifying their vulnerability to what lived inside with them.
The social order was written into the very architecture. Wealthier families might build multiple rooms or even 2 stories, creating miniature labyrinths of connected chambers. Poorer ones made do with a single rectangular space, everything crammed together. Sleeping mats, cooking fires, storage jars, chickens scratching the dirt floor. From the street, the difference wasn't always obvious. Mud is democratic in appearance, but step inside and inequality stared back at you in every corner. Festivals punctuated the monotony, flooding these houses with sound and color. Imagine walls trembling from drums, courtyards packed with dancers, food spilling from platters. Neighbors flowed in and out, collapsing the boundary between private and communal. For a night or a week, the mud house became a theater. Every niche and rooftop a stage. The same walls that held whispered worries could roar with celebration. Proof that endurance wasn't only grim, it was also joyous when given the chance. All of this layered into an existence both fragile and unyielding. The house was an archive of contradictions, labor and rest, fear and laughter, scarcity and abundance, devotion and disease. To live in one was to live in the constant tension between collapse and renewal, a tension baked into every sun-dried brick. The walls might not last a century, but the habits inside them lasted millennia, carried forward by descendants who hardly noticed they were repeating the same gestures, fighting the same battles, under roofs that looked remarkably familiar. Move through the narrow alleys of a mud brick settlement, and you begin to notice a rhythm that outsiders rarely appreciate. The streets themselves are a testament to adaptation. Narrow passageways conserve shade, force traffic to flow predictably, and create wind corridors that mitigate heat during peak afternoon hours. From above, the neighborhood looks like a patchwork quilt, but on the ground, every corner has a purpose. Courtyards are not just leisure spaces, they are lifelines, arenas for work, play, and negotiation. The mud walls around you absorb sound and reflect it unpredictably, so you can never entirely hide from life or its chaos. Noise becomes a form of intimacy here. Roosters, donkeys, carts clattering over uneven surfaces, the occasional shout from a neighbor, each contributes to the constant pulse of the community. Silence is unnatural and often fleeting. It signals sickness, mourning, or absence. Every footstep echoes against walls that remember. Every laugh ricochets in a way that binds the community together, whether you like it or not. Living in mud brick homes meant living in a shared life, a reality you could not easily escape.
Children grow up in this cacophony, learning early how to navigate both the physical and social architecture. They memorize which rooftops are safe to cross, which courtyards are off limits, and which neighbors are generous with water or food. Education is tactile and kinetic. A child observing a parent repairing a cracked wall gains skills as critical as any lesson in a modern classroom. They learn responsibility, dexterity, patience, and resilience, not from books, but from the daily negotiation with mud, sun, water, and community expectations. Daily chores are both ritual and survival. Grains must be milled, dough kneaded, water fetched and distributed carefully to sustain the walls and the family alike. Cooking is a sensory assault. Smoke, heat, and the pungent aroma of fire-dried ingredients. The clay floor is simultaneously workspace, dining table, and playground. Everything exists on the ground level, which demands constant awareness. A spilled jar of water isn't just inconvenient, it's an invitation for mud to soften, plaster to weaken, and walls to threaten collapse. Every action carries consequences, and skill is measured not by luxury, but by survival.
Light itself behaves strangely in these spaces. Tiny windows allow slivers of illumination, painting stripes across walls, accentuating every scratch, every finger mark, every patch of plaster. By design, the interiors remain dim during the heat of the day, which conserves coolness but also creates shadows that play tricks on perception. Flickering oil lamps at night extend visibility, but their smoke leaves a permanent trace, a soft gray patina that reminds inhabitants of the house's fragility. Light and darkness become part of the architecture, shaping behavior as much as mud and straw. Even the walls communicate. A crack running along a corner signals structural weakness. A bulge warns of water saturation. These silent messages demand attention. Families monitor them constantly, mending as needed, interpreting subtle signs that modern builders might miss. Each repair is a negotiation between the house and its occupants, a conversation that ensures the continuation of daily life. Mud brick houses are alive in a way stone palaces never are. They respond, they decay, and they demand maintenance. Seasons leave their fingerprints too. Rain splashes against the walls, leaving streaks that darken in the sun. Summer sun bleaches surfaces and hardens mud into brittle perfection. Winter frost seeps into corners and tests the durability of roofs and plaster alike. Adaptation is continuous. People build, repair, and adjust in cycles dictated not by clocks, but by climate, often using intuition honed over generations. It's labor-intensive, yes, but it instills an intimate knowledge of the natural world, a relationship with the elements that modern insulated walls and HVAC systems have made nearly impossible. Then there is community oversight, often built into the very layout of the homes. Courtyards and alleyways are stages for observation, ensuring no one can fully hide idleness or negligence. Shared roofs create interactions that are unavoidable, where neighbors inspect drying grain or comment on repairs, and gossip spreads as efficiently as news of shortages or emergencies. Privacy is a luxury seldom afforded, but accountability is universal. Social cohesion is embedded into the spatial configuration, making architecture a silent partner in the governance of daily life. Even amidst this demanding routine, families find space for creativity. Walls and floors are often scratched or painted with simple designs, marks of identity and continuity. Roofs serve as gardens or drying spaces, layered with human ingenuity. These small acts
placing a figurine in a corner, tracing a pattern into wet plaster, carefully aligning bricks, imbue the house with personality, resisting the blandness of mere survival. Creativity and necessity coexist, transforming a precarious shelter into a home rich with memory and culture.
By the time night fully descends, mud brick homes take on a different character. Shadows deepen, the air cools just enough to permit breathing, and the community, now quieter, settles into routines of rest, reflection, and preparation for the next cycle of sun, wind, and labor. Life is constant negotiation, heat and cold, work and leisure, fragility and resilience. Yet, within this fragile structure, civilization persists. Every brick, every mat, every jar and lamp carries the weight of generations who learned to endure, adapt, and, remarkably, thrive. By now, it's clear that mud brick homes were more than shelters. They were living organisms, dynamic and responsive to every human action and natural force. Every crack, every patch, every layer of plaster carried the memory of its occupants, silently recording centuries of survival. And yet, from the outside, these neighborhoods could appear deceptively uniform. One house might be just a single room, another 2 stories with small terraces and an intricately planned roof. Despite differences, they all followed the same logic: protection against sun, cold, and rain, and the creation of a rhythm for life that balanced necessity and resilience. Inside, life revolved around micro-routines dictated by both climate and structure. Morning meant preparation, movement, and exertion before the sun's full weight made everything unbearable. Women managed grain, water, and cooking fires, while children delivered messages, carried loads, or played in the thin slices of shade the house afforded. Men repaired walls, fetched water, or tended to animals. Every task was interconnected. Spill a jar of water, and suddenly the floor softened, walls threatened collapse, and the day's schedule shifted. Survival was choreographed down to the smallest gestures. Dust and smoke were constants. Earthen floors, while practical, created clouds of dust with every footstep. Cooking fires added soot and odor, creating a mix that outsiders would find oppressive, but inhabitants adapted to it with an almost unconscious tolerance. Even sleeping arrangements were influenced by this environment. Mats on the floor, blankets arranged to trap warmth, head positions chosen to catch breezes or avoid smoke. Every detail mattered. Comfort wasn't defined by luxury. It was defined by endurance and strategy. The communal nature of mud brick living
extended beyond shared walls into social governance. Roofs and courtyards weren't merely functional, they were public spaces where disputes were aired, goods exchanged, and information circulated. Everyone knew everyone else's business, intentionally or not. A fallen brick, a leaking roof, or a missing jar could ripple through the neighborhood as gossip or a cautionary tale. Social cohesion built into the architecture ensured accountability and support simultaneously. Seasonal changes dictated behavior and construction cycles. Summer heat pressed families onto roofs. Winter frost demanded thick blankets and fire tending. Rain meant urgent patching of walls and roofs to prevent collapse. Families adapted intuitively, following patterns developed over generations. Houses were never static. They evolved continuously, layer by layer, brick by brick. In essence, each home was an ongoing experiment in human ingenuity against environmental extremes. Children's education was embedded into daily routines. Observation, imitation, and participation replaced formal lessons. A child watching a parent plaster a wall learns geometry, physics, and patience simultaneously. Carrying water teaches coordination and planning. Sorting grain develops pattern recognition and timing. Every chore doubles as training for life, integrating survival skills into ordinary experience. Schools weren't buildings, they were homes, courtyards, and workshops. Food production and storage intertwined with architecture. Clay jars, pits, and rooftop racks kept grain, dates, and oil preserved. Ventilation, sun exposure, and proximity to living areas were carefully balanced to prevent spoilage. Cooking and preservation were acts of both art and strategy, where every decision could affect survival. The kitchen was not a room, it was an ecosystem, dependent on heat, airflow, and careful management of limited resources. Despite the constant pressure of climate, labor, and communal scrutiny, these homes carried a profound sense of continuity. Each brick and patch of plaster connected generations. Families repaired and rebuilt the same walls their ancestors had laid, and in doing so, preserved not just material shelter, but memory, ritual, and identity. These homes were repositories of culture, holding within their layers the full spectrum of human life: work, play, devotion, conflict, and celebration. Even aesthetic expression found a way into these pragmatic structures. Simple markings, geometric scratches, or traces of pigment transformed plain mud walls into visual narratives. Roof arrangements, courtyard decorations, and storage organization all reflected the tastes and priorities of families. Function and creativity coexisted, demonstrating that human desire for expression persists even under the strictest material constraints. By nightfall, the neighborhood transformed into a quiet living organism. Families settled onto mats, roofs glimmered with lamplight, courtyards emptied, and the air cooled enough to permit rest. Life inside mud brick homes is a dance between impermanence and persistence. Walls might crumble, roofs might sag, storms could threaten collapse. But the cycle continued, repeated day after day, generation after generation. And in this repetitive, fragile, yet enduring life, civilizations endured. Step into the corner of a house just as the sun reaches its zenith, and you realize survival here is orchestrated by small, deliberate adjustments. The mud walls radiate heat like living furnaces. Doors are barely more than slits, windows smaller than your hand, all designed to limit exposure and retain what little coolness is left inside. Every breath feels warm, dry, slightly gritty from the omnipresent dust. Sweat beads along foreheads, arms, and necks, yet the household carries on, moving with purpose. Grains are ground, water fetched, bread kneaded, and mud patched, all under the relentless watch of the sun. Even cooking becomes a strategic battle. Fires cannot be left unattended. They produce smoke that thickens the already stifling air. Clay ovens are precious, carefully maintained, and shared if needed. Cooking schedules bend around the heat of the day. Breakfast at dawn, lunch delayed or eaten cold, dinner prepared only as the sun begins to relent. Food is basic, practical, and efficient. There's no space for extravagance. The goal is sustenance. Every loaf of bread, every jar of preserved dates represents hours of labor, concentration, and negotiation with environmental extremes. Children are deeply woven into this rhythm. They carry water, chase stray chickens, run errands for adults, and participate in chores that seem tedious but are essential. Each action teaches lessons: balance, endurance, timing, patience. They internalize the architecture as much as the culture. Roof ladders, narrow alleys, crowded courtyards all become natural playgrounds and classrooms. Every brick, every stair, every wall crack is a text from which they learn the rules of survival. Water management is central. Jars of water buried in floors, clay basins in corners, runoff carefully directed, all demonstrate the intimate knowledge residents have of their own homes. Too much water softens walls. Too little leads to dehydration and structural instability. Water shapes daily schedules and social interactions. sharing water becomes an act of both necessity and community. The survival of each home is bound to the careful distribution and conservation of this precious resource.
Noise fills these spaces constantly. The grinding of stone querns, the clatter of cooking utensils, children's laughter, neighbors' chatter, all reverberate through thin walls. Privacy is almost non-existent, yet this auditory exposure fosters interdependence. Families learn to anticipate neighbors' needs, coordinate communal tasks, and maintain social cohesion. The mud brick environment enforces a kind of shared responsibility where the physical closeness mirrors the social network.
Seasonal changes alter interior life dramatically. Summer forces residents onto rooftops, seeking the faintest breeze, while winter drives everyone inside, huddled near fires. Courtyards alternate between sun traps and sheltered workspaces. Mud plaster must be reapplied, roofs patched, and drainage checked regularly. The home is never static. It's a living, responsive structure that demands constant attention. Adaptation is continuous, instinctual, and essential. Despite its utilitarian nature, the home also fosters creativity. Simple decorations, etched patterns, small figurines, painted walls reflect personal and familial identity. Every household imparts character to the building, blending function with expression. Even mundane objects become culturally significant. Pots, mats, jars, and tools carry marks of use, improvisation, and ingenuity. Life, in all its practical demands, becomes a canvas for human ingenuity. The community itself shapes architectural behavior. Narrow alleys, shared rooftops, and interconnected courtyards enforce visibility and accountability. Laziness, negligence, or misfortune can ripple outward, impacting neighbors. Yet support is equally distributed. Shared labor, collective repairs, and mutual aid ensure survival. Mud brick homes are not isolated entities. They are nodes in a tightly woven social fabric where cooperation is as essential as skill. At night, the neighborhood transforms. Lamps flicker in niches, fires burn low, and the air cools enough for fleeting comfort. Shadows elongate across walls. Courtyards empty, and roofs become sleeping platforms. Families settle into their cyclical routines, ever vigilant yet habituated to the rhythms of life dictated by the sun, wind, rain, and mud. The house breathes along with its occupants, storing warmth and memory, reflecting both the vulnerability and resilience inherent in everyday existence. Through these cycles of labor, observation, and adaptation, mud brick homes endure. They are fragile, ephemeral, yet astonishingly persistent, accommodating generations of families
who navigate environmental extremes with skill, patience, and ingenuity. Within each wall, every floor, every roof beam lies a story of survival, continuity, and human determination. Reminders that civilization often flourishes not in monuments of stone, but in the humble, malleable structures of everyday life. Even a brief walk through these mud brick neighborhoods reveals the intricate choreography of life. Courtyards buzz with simultaneous activity. Children chase each other between drying mats of grain. Women stir bubbling pots while tending to infants. Men haul water or repair walls. Every corner of the house carries purpose, and every action has consequences. Knock over a jar of water, and suddenly plaster softens, dust mixes with mud, and repair work becomes urgent. The house is a living organism, responding to every gesture and decision, its survival intertwined with the diligence of its occupants. The materials themselves dictate behavior. Clay and straw bricks are resilient yet vulnerable, absorbing heat by day, releasing it by night. They record the touch of hands and the imprint of tools, holding memory in their surfaces. A scratch, a dent, or a repaired crack tells the story of labor, care, or improvisation. Walls become chronicles of daily life, documenting centuries of human activity far more vividly than stone or marble. Every home is simultaneously a shelter and a testament. Ventilation is never incidental. Small apertures high in the walls, slits for doors, and open courtyards create airflow, moderating extreme temperatures. The placement of these features is intuitive, informed by generations of observation. A breeze through the courtyard is a lifeline, while misdirected airflow could leave a room stifling or dangerously dry. Residents learned to read the wind, adjust daily routines, and maximize comfort in spaces that are, by modern standards, crude yet remarkably effective. Sound is equally shaped by architecture. Open courtyards amplify communal activity. Narrow alleys channel footsteps, voices, and the occasional bray of a donkey. Noise is inevitable, unavoidable, yet it also serves social function. Residents know when neighbors are working, eating, or falling ill. The walls, thin and porous, are conduits for both communication and surveillance, ensuring that the community remains intertwined, cooperative, and accountable. Children absorb this environment as education. Tasks are learned by observation and practice. Fetching water, carrying jars, grinding grain, repairing walls. Every chore teaches lessons about physics, geometry, and resource management. Mistakes have immediate consequences,
reinforcing skill acquisition in ways that formal classrooms cannot. Children learn resilience, dexterity, patience, and problem solving. Practical knowledge embedded in daily experience rather than abstract theory. Water management is central to household survival. Clay basins, buried jars, and careful drainage prevent erosion, preserve food, and sustain life. The distribution and conservation of water govern daily schedules, shape chores, and influence interactions between neighbors. A jar shared or hoarded could impact both domestic stability and social relationships. In mud brick communities, water is both a resource and a measure of human ingenuity. Food production and storage are equally entwined with architecture. Grains are milled, stored, and dried on rooftops. Dates and figs hang in the sun. Oil and beer are kept in earthen vessels, carefully positioned to minimize spoilage. Cooking is timed to temperature, humidity, and seasonal variation. Fire placement, smoke management, and airflow are all critical. The house itself is an active participant in these processes, mediating between environment, labor, and survival. Health and hygiene are constant concerns. Crowded spaces, porous walls, and shared surfaces create conditions where illness can spread quickly. Remedies are a mix of herbal knowledge, folk practices, and pragmatic observation. Every cough, fever, or minor injury is addressed within the household, sometimes with neighborly assistance. The architecture both protects and exposes, providing shelter while amplifying vulnerabilities. Survival is a delicate balance. Even amidst toil, humans carve out spaces for ritual and creativity. Altars tucked in niches, etched patterns in plaster, carefully arranged jars, and small figurines imbue domestic life with symbolic meaning. These acts are small, subtle, but powerful. A family expressing identity, continuity, and hope within walls that could crumble at any moment. Life within mud brick homes is simultaneously practical and imaginative, functional yet expressive. By nightfall, the neighborhood quiets in measured rhythms. Lamps flicker in niches, fires burn low, and courtyards empty. The air cools, shadows deepen, and rooftops become sleeping platforms. Families settle into mats, huddling against cold, heat, or fatigue. The mud walls absorb, store, and release temperature, memory, and sound, mediating between humans and environment. It is a cycle repeated endlessly. Labor, care, vigilance, rest. Through this constant rhythm, the mud brick home transcends its humble materials. It is fragile and yet enduring, ephemeral and yet foundational. Each wall, roof, and floor tells stories of generations who lived, worked, and thrived under harsh sun, chilling nights, and merciless seasonal change. Civilization persists not in grandeur, but in the intimate, intricate, and resilient architecture of daily life.
The rhythm of daily life in mud brick homes is inseparable from the environment. Sun, wind, rain, and dust shape every action, from how water is stored to how grain is dried. The house is never passive. It responds, adapts, and sometimes rebels. A sudden storm can turn the floor into mud, collapse a roof, or wash away a carefully dried batch of food. Residents don't just live with these risks, they anticipate them, building redundancy into walls, roofs, and courtyards. This constant negotiation between human ingenuity and environmental unpredictability is the backbone of survival.
Courtyards are multifunctional theaters of life. Morning brings the grinding of grain, the preparation of dough, and the organization of water jars. By noon, roofs become sleeping platforms, while children play in shadowed corners, learning balance and agility. Evening sees communal interaction, neighbors exchanging news, sharing meals, or helping repair walls damaged by the day's heat. Every square foot is utilized. Every routine doubles as a lesson in adaptation, cooperation, and endurance. The house itself orchestrates this flow, its spatial layout guiding behavior as much as the social rules of the community. Walls and roofs tell stories without words. Cracks indicate age. Repairs reveal attentiveness, and plastered surfaces reflect cycles of care and neglect. Even small scratches or imprints carry meaning. A child's doodle, a worker's mark, a family symbol etched into damp plaster. The mud records life in a tactile, permanent way, capturing history in its very composition. Unlike stone monuments, which glorify rulers and conquest, mud brick homes glorify ordinary existence, the labor, ingenuity, and resilience of the common people. Light and shadow shape experience as well. Tiny windows and door slits create beams that cut across floors, highlighting objects, textures, and dust particles suspended in the air. These shafts of light serve practical purposes, marking time, illuminating workspaces, and cooling surfaces in indirect ways. At night, oil lamps and small hearths cast flickering shadows that transform the house, turning mundane walls into dynamic canvases. These lighting conditions influence movement, task planning, and social interaction, integrating the environment into daily routines. Children are immersed in this living architecture from birth.
They carry water, help prepare food, and participate in repairs, absorbing lessons that blend physical skill, observation, and social intelligence. They memorize the quirks of walls, roofs, and courtyards, learning how to navigate the community safely and efficiently. Mistakes have immediate consequences. A broken jar, a slipped mat, a misapplied plaster. But these consequences are part of the education, teaching responsibility and foresight in ways formal schools never could. Water management is an ongoing negotiation. Basins, jars, and channels control distribution, prevent structural damage, and sustain life. Improper handling can weaken walls, ruin food, and strain social relationships. Sharing, borrowing, and trading water strengthens social bonds, while mismanagement risks isolation or tension. Every household develops an intimate understanding of this critical resource, blending experience with inherited knowledge to survive in a demanding environment. Food preparation mirrors these principles. Grains, fruits, and legumes are dried, stored, and cooked in cycles dictated by temperature, humidity, and seasonal variation. Kitchens are integrated into living spaces, requiring careful coordination to avoid accidents. Fire, smoke, and airflow are constantly monitored, as mistakes can threaten both health and structural integrity. Every meal is a negotiation between material constraints and human skill, reflecting the ingenuity required to sustain life in a fragile architectural context. Health and hygiene are inseparable from spatial arrangement. Narrow alleys, shared courtyards, and porous walls facilitate both disease transmission and social observation. Illness is monitored, treated, and mitigated within the household, sometimes with neighborly assistance. Architecture influences not only comfort but survival, shaping the way people respond to injury, disease, or seasonal epidemics. The house is a partner in both protection and exposure, a living framework for human resilience.
Creativity thrives within these constraints. Altars, etched patterns, and simple decorations enrich domestic spaces, blending function and expression. Roofs serve as gardens or drying platforms. Courtyards host social gatherings and ritual practices. Even the most utilitarian elements, jars, mats, tools, become carriers of identity, memory, and ingenuity. Life in mud brick homes is simultaneously constrained and expressive, mundane and remarkable, ephemeral and enduring. By nightfall, the settlement transforms. Air cools, sounds soften, and families retreat to mats and rooftops. Shadows stretch across walls, highlighting texture, scratches, and repairs. The house absorbs and releases heat, sound, and memory, mediating between the natural environment and human life. This cycle of labor, care, observation, and rest continues endlessly,
embedding resilience into the very fabric of the mud brick home.
The resilience of mud brick homes becomes even clearer when you consider how they weathered extremes over time. Summer's blistering heat, winter's biting cold, sudden storms and sporadic floods tested every wall, roof, and floor. And yet, generation after generation, families adapted. They patched, rebuilt, and reinforced, using knowledge passed down like an unspoken manual. Mud was forgiving when cared for, and ruthless when neglected. Survival depended as much on attention to detail as on sheer labor. Every household acted as both steward and engineer, negotiating the constant tension between fragility and endurance.
Courtyards served as multifunctional stages where life unfolded in continuous loops. Women sorted and milled grains in the morning, children chased each other in shadows, and men repaired walls or roofs, all while the sun marked the passage of time with harsh accuracy. Roofs doubled as sleeping platforms during hot nights and sometimes as drying spaces for food, herbs, or textiles. Each section of the house was multifunctional, yet perfectly orchestrated to maintain both order and survival. Every brick, mat, and jar contributed to this choreography.
Daily chores demanded precision.
Fetching water was never trivial. It determined not only hydration but structural integrity. Spilled water softened floors and weakened walls, forcing repairs that consumed time and labor. Cooking required careful control of fires, ventilation, and airflow to avoid suffocating heat or smoke accumulation. Grain had to be stored in dry, shaded areas, while fruits and legumes were laid out on rooftops or shelves. Every decision, however mundane, could ripple through the household, influencing health, comfort, and survival.
Children were essential participants, learning through observation and action. They internalized the rhythms of work, timing, and social coordination. A misstep, dropping a jar, spilling water, or misplacing a tool taught lessons quickly and memorably. Their education was embedded into daily life, combining practical skill, social knowledge, and instinctive understanding of their environment. Growing up inside a mud brick home meant learning physics, time management, and cooperation as naturally as breathing.
Water management remained central. Jars, basins, and channels guided distribution, mitigated damage, and regulated domestic activity. Sharing water created bonds, while mismanagement led to tension or failure. Water dictated schedules, chore organization, and interaction with neighbors. Every household developed an intimate knowledge of this critical resource, blending inherited wisdom with observation and improvisation.
Food practices were equally influenced by the architecture. Clay jars, storage pits, and rooftop drying areas ensured preservation against heat, humidity, and pests. Kitchens, often integral to living spaces, demanded careful management of fire and airflow. Meals were timed according to sun and season, reflecting an intimate coordination between human behavior and environmental constraints. Survival was simultaneously a matter of skill, observation, and constant vigilance.
Health and sanitation were mediated by the home itself. Crowded spaces and porous walls amplified vulnerability to disease, requiring proactive observation and treatment. Shared courtyards and close quarters enforced both social cohesion and accountability. The architecture was both protector and transmitter, shaping interactions, routines, and collective behavior. Families monitored one another as much as they monitored the structure, creating a living network of mutual care and responsibility.
Ritual and creativity intertwined seamlessly with necessity. Simple etched patterns, painted walls, or small figurines transformed utilitarian spaces into expressions of identity. Courtyards hosted celebrations, storytelling, and practical collaboration. Even the smallest domestic detail, placement of a pot, alignment of mats, repair of a roof tile, reflected ingenuity, culture, and memory. Life in mud brick homes was simultaneously practical, expressive, and resilient, a continuous negotiation between human need and environmental challenge. As night fell, the settlement shifted subtly. Fires burned low, lamps flickered, and rooftops became sleeping platforms. Shadows stretched across walls, revealing textures, scratches, and repairs. The house absorbed heat, sound, and memory, mediating between human activity and natural forces. Families settled into routines of rest, vigilance, and preparation for the next day. In these humble structures, civilization endured not through grandeur, but through continuous adaptation, observation, and care. By the end of each day, the mud brick home stood as a testament to human persistence. Fragile yet enduring, simple yet complex, it preserved the rhythms, labor, ingenuity, and culture of its occupants. In these walls, generations lived, learned, and thrived, proving that civilization often flourishes not in monumental architecture, but in structures shaped by human resilience, intelligence, and creativity.
By mid-morning, the sun's intensity forces inhabitants to make deliberate choices. Courtyards that were bustling in the early hours now empty as heat presses down relentlessly. Roofs become both refuge and workspace. Mats are spread to catch the faintest breeze, grains and figs laid out to dry, and children cluster in shadowed corners, learning balance and dexterity on uneven surfaces. Life here is a constant negotiation between exposure and shelter, labor and rest, observation and action. Every wall, corner, and roof beam serves multiple purposes. Storage is vertical as much as horizontal, jars and baskets stacked against walls, small niches for tools and household objects, shelves for dried herbs and fruits. The house is a multifunctional organism, its spatial arrangements dictating the flow of life as much as the social structure within. It's easy to imagine the constant calculations: where to place a jar, how to maximize airflow, how to avoid weakening a wall while storing necessary goods.
Children learn these lessons intuitively. Carrying a water jar, climbing a roof ladder, or maneuvering through a narrow alley teaches coordination, problem solving, and anticipation. Mistakes are corrected immediately, whether by spillages, minor accidents, or adult intervention. Education here is kinetic and practical, embedded into daily routines and inseparable from survival. By adulthood, these lessons translate into a deep, intuitive understanding of the environment and its challenges.
Water remains the central element of domestic life. Basins, jars, and channels are carefully maintained to prevent structural damage and ensure access. Sharing water reinforces social bonds, while scarcity can strain relationships. Water management is both technical and social, requiring attention to detail and cooperation. The household exists in constant dialogue with this precious resource, adjusting routines to balance availability with demand.
Cooking and food storage are equally strategic. Grains, fruits, legumes, and other staples are dried and stored with precise attention to temperature, moisture, and sunlight. Kitchens integrated into living spaces necessitate careful control of fires and airflow to avoid smoke inhalation or structural damage. Meals are timed according to environmental conditions, and every step, from kneading dough to storing jars, is an exercise in coordination, observation, and adaptability. Noise and sound patterns shape life within and around the home. Courtyards amplify communal activity. Narrow alleys direct movement and conversation, and thin walls transmit voices and footsteps. Residents rely on these acoustic cues to monitor neighbors, coordinate labor, and detect potential problems. Sound becomes a medium of social cohesion, a silent network ensuring that each household remains connected and accountable. Seasonal cycles dictate additional adaptation. Summer drives activity to rooftops and shaded areas, while winter concentrates families near hearths. Storms and rain require rapid repair and reinforcement. Mud walls, while durable when maintained, are vulnerable to neglect or sudden weather shifts. Continuous monitoring, patching,
and reinforcement are essential. These cycles of labor and observation define domestic life, embedding resilience into every action.
Health and hygiene are shaped by spatial and material realities. Shared courtyards, porous walls, and densely packed interiors facilitate both communal care and the spread of disease. Families develop practical knowledge to manage risks, treat illness, and protect vulnerable members. Architecture mediates exposure, comfort, and survival, requiring constant vigilance and adaptation. Creativity and ritual are interwoven with necessity. Etched patterns, painted symbols, small altars, and decorative arrangements provide expression within functional spaces. Roofs, courtyards, and niches host both daily chores and moments of play, storytelling, or celebration. Even the smallest act, aligning jars, repairing a wall, arranging mats, reflects ingenuity, culture, and memory. These homes are simultaneously utilitarian and expressive, functional and cultural, ephemeral and enduring.
By evening, the neighborhood quiets. Fires burn low, lamps flicker, and roof docks serve as sleeping platforms. Shadows elongate, revealing textures and repairs that speak of daily labor and care. Mud walls absorb and release heat, sound, and memory, mediating between human activity and natural forces. Families settle into cycles of rest, reflection, and preparation for the next day. Within these walls, civilization persists not in grandeur but through continuous adaptation, skill, and resilience. Every day, every season, and every generation reinforces the continuity of life in mud brick homes. Fragile yet enduring, these structures embody labor, ingenuity, memory, and culture. Within their walls, ordinary people sustained life, nurtured families, and built communities capable of thriving under relentless environmental extremes. Civilization, it turns out, often flourishes not through monumental stone, but through the intimate, resilient architecture of everyday existence. The afternoon sun forces life to adapt in both subtle and dramatic ways. Courtyards that once teemed with activity now hold only shadows. Roofs become platforms for labor and rest, capturing whatever breeze manages to slip through the narrow alleys. Children find quiet corners to play or learn, observing adults as they repair walls, fetch water, or manage the day's food supply. Every gesture is purposeful. Every action has consequences. Survival is choreographed down to the smallest detail.
The architecture itself dictates behavior. Thick mud walls store heat during the day and release it at night. Small apertures control light and airflow, and roof terraces serve as multifunctional spaces. Storage solutions are both vertical and horizontal. Jars stacked in corners, niches for tools, mats for sleeping, and surfaces for drying grains or textiles. The house is a living organism, its layout shaping work, play, and social interaction. Every design choice reflects centuries of refinement and adaptation. Children navigate this environment intuitively, learning by doing. Carrying water teaches balance and foresight. Climbing ladders or narrow stairs develops agility. Participating in chores builds coordination and responsibility. Mistakes are instructive. Spilled water softens floors. Misaligned bricks weaken walls. Improperly stored food spoils. But these lessons are absorbed quickly and practically. Education here is hands-on, embedded in the rhythm of daily life, and inseparable from survival. Water management is central to domestic stability. Basins, jars, and channels guide distribution, prevent structural damage, and sustain life. Sharing water strengthens social bonds, while scarcity tests relationships and ingenuity. Water shapes the daily schedule, chore organization, and interaction with neighbors. Every household develops an intimate, instinctive knowledge of this vital resource. Food preparation and storage require similar strategic awareness. Grains, legumes, fruits, and other staples are carefully dried and stored to avoid spoilage. Kitchens integrated into living spaces demand meticulous control of fires and airflow to maintain safety and comfort. Meals are timed according to environmental conditions, and every step, from grinding grain to storing jars, is a demonstration of skill, coordination, and anticipation. Noise and sound are part of the household's social fabric. Courtyards amplify activity. Narrow alleys channel voices, and thin walls transmit both warning and communication. Residents interpret these auditory cues constantly, monitoring neighbors, coordinating labor, and detecting problems. Sound is both functional and social, a continuous thread linking households and sustaining communal cohesion. Seasonal change transforms daily routines. Summer heat pushes activity to shaded areas and rooftops, while winter frost concentrates families around hearths. Storms require urgent repairs, testing both skill and cooperation. Mud walls, durable when maintained, are vulnerable to neglect or sudden weather extremes. Survival relies on continuous vigilance, patching, and reinforcement. The architecture itself becomes a teacher, guiding behavior and embedding resilience into every action. Health and hygiene are shaped by these environmental realities. Crowded spaces, porous walls, and shared surfaces create conditions conducive to both care and disease. Families develop practical strategies to monitor, treat, and prevent illness, often with neighborly assistance.
Architecture mediates exposure and comfort, shaping both routines and social interactions. Survival is a balance between vigilance and adaptation.
Even amid labor, creativity flourishes. Etched patterns, small figurines, painted walls, and carefully arranged household items infuse personal identity into functional spaces. Courtyards, rooftops, and niches host both work and play, ritual and daily life. Every action, from repairing a wall to aligning jars, reflects ingenuity, memory, and cultural continuity. Life in mud brick homes is simultaneously practical and expressive, ephemeral yet enduring.
As night falls, the settlement shifts. Fires burn low, lamps flicker in niches, and rooftops become sleeping platforms. Shadows stretch across walls, revealing textures, cracks, and repairs that speak of the day's labor. Mud walls absorb and release heat, sound, and memory, mediating between human life and environmental forces. Families settle into cycles of rest, observation, and preparation for the next day. In these simple structures, civilization endures, not through monumental displays, but through continuous adaptation, skill, and communal resilience. Generations rise and fall within these walls, each leaving traces in plaster, brick, and ritual. Fragile yet enduring, practical yet expressive, mud brick homes encapsulate labor, ingenuity, culture, and survival. Civilization thrives not in monuments of stone, but in the humble, resilient architecture of daily life, where the ordinary acts of living sustain human continuity against the relentless sun and biting cold. Morning arrives with a soft golden light filtering through narrow slits and small windows, casting elongated shadows across earthen floors. The day begins slowly, not with alarm clocks or schedules, but with instinct and environmental cues. Residents stretch, adjust mats, and begin chores attuned to the heat and light. Every action considers the house as a living partner, walls that store heat, floors that soften under moisture, rooftops that catch the first breeze. Life here is a negotiation, a constant adaptation between human intention and environmental forces.
Courtyards, the heart of the home, fill with activity. Women grind grain, knead dough, and manage water jars. Children chase each other or carry small loads, and men repair walls or roofs. Each movement is deliberate, as even a small mistake, a dropped jar or loosened brick, can ripple through the household. The mud brick environment demands constant vigilance, attention, and skill. Yet within these constraints, life flows rhythmically, each resident playing a role in the architecture of survival.
Children's education is embedded in these daily routines. Carrying water
teaches balance and planning. Climbing rooftops develops coordination. Observing repairs instills problem-solving skills. Mistakes are instructive, often with immediate consequences. Learning is kinetic and practical, entwined with the rhythm of labor and observation. By adulthood, these children possess an intuitive understanding of their environment, social structure, and the fragile balance sustaining their homes.
Water management remains a central concern. Basins, jars, and channels are carefully maintained to prevent wall erosion and structural damage. Sharing water fosters social bonds, while mismanagement strains relationships. Water dictates daily schedules, chore allocation, and interaction with neighbors. The household exists in constant dialogue with this resource, blending inherited knowledge, observation, and improvisation. Food storage and preparation intertwine with architecture. Grains, legumes, fruits, and oils are preserved using rooftops, niches, and clay jars. Kitchens, often integrated into living spaces, require constant attention to fire, smoke, and airflow. Meals are timed according to sun and seasonal patterns. Every step, from grinding and cooking to storage, is a negotiation between environmental constraints and human ingenuity, reflecting the practical intelligence necessary for survival. Sound, ever present, shapes behavior. Courtyards amplify work and play. Narrow alleys channel voices and footsteps, and thin walls transmit conversation and warning. Residents interpret these auditory cues to coordinate labor, anticipate needs, and detect potential problems. Sound is not merely ambient. It is functional, social, and deeply woven into daily life, creating a network of awareness and accountability within the community. Seasonal shifts demand adaptation. Summer heat drives activity to shaded areas and rooftops. Winter frost concentrates families around hearths. Storms or sudden downpours require immediate reinforcement of walls and roofs. Mud bricks, while durable when cared for, are vulnerable to neglect or extreme weather. Continuous monitoring, repair, and strategic action are essential, embedding resilience into the very routines of life. Health and hygiene remain intimately tied to the built environment. Shared spaces and porous walls facilitate both care and vulnerability to disease. Families develop practical strategies for monitoring and treating illness, often aided by neighbors. Architecture mediates both protection and exposure, influencing behavior, comfort, and survival. Daily routines are choreographed to balance these risks with the demands of labor and sustenance. Creativity and ritual flourish within these functional constraints. Small etched patterns, painted surfaces, altars, and carefully arranged household objects imbue personal identity into utilitarian spaces. Roofs and courtyards host work, play, and celebration. Even small gestures, aligning jars, repairing walls, organizing mats, reflect ingenuity, memory, and cultural continuity. Life in mud brick homes is practical, expressive, and resilient, a delicate balance between necessity and imagination. As dusk approaches, the neighborhood quiets. Fires burn low, lamps flicker in niches, and rooftops become sleeping platforms. Shadows stretch across walls, emphasizing textures, repairs, and history embedded in the mud. Walls absorb and release heat, sound, and memory, mediating between humans and their environment. Families settle into nightly routines of rest, reflection, and preparation. Civilization persists not in monumental architecture, but in the fragile, adaptive, and enduring structures of everyday life.
Every day, every season, and every generation reinforces the continuity of life in mud brick homes. Fragile yet resilient, practical yet expressive, these structures hold the labor, ingenuity, and culture of countless generations. Civilization flourishes not in grandeur, but in the intimate, resilient architecture of daily survival under the relentless sun and biting cold.
By late morning, the household is fully immersed in the rhythm of daily survival. The sun pours relentlessly onto mud brick walls, heating floors and amplifying the dryness of the air. Every step, every task, every gesture is calculated to maintain both comfort and structural integrity. Women balance jars of water, grind grains, and prepare meals, all while keeping an eye on children, navigating the uneven surfaces of floors, rooftops, and narrow alleys. Men attend to repairs, reinforcing walls, patching cracks, and monitoring the stability of roofs. The house is alive, a dynamic participant in daily life, responding to human action and environmental forces alike. The multifunctionality of courtyards becomes increasingly apparent. Early chores, grain sorting, food preparation, water management give way to tasks like drying textiles, repairing tools, or tending small rooftop gardens. Children play and learn in these spaces, developing agility, spatial awareness, and social skills as they interact with peers and observe adults. The courtyard is both workspace and classroom, seamlessly blending labor, education, and leisure in a single environment. Children's education is profoundly experiential. Carrying water, climbing ladders, and assisting in repairs instills practical knowledge, while minor mistakes offer immediate lessons
in cause and effect. The rhythm of life ensures that learning is continuous, holistic, and embedded within the daily cycle of survival. Adults, too, are constantly learning, adapting techniques, testing materials, and refining routines based on subtle shifts in climate or building behavior. Water, the lifeblood of the household, demands constant attention. Jars, basins, and channels are meticulously managed to prevent damage to walls and floors. Sharing water strengthens social ties, while mismanagement can create tension or jeopardize survival. Every household member develops an intuitive understanding of flow, quantity, and timing, integrating environmental observation with inherited wisdom. Water management is both technical and social, a core pillar of domestic life.
Food preparation and storage are tightly interwoven with architecture. Grains, fruits, legumes, and other staples are dried, stored, and preserved in specialized niches on rooftops and within clay jars. Fire and airflow are monitored carefully in integrated kitchen spaces to avoid accidents or spoilage. Meals are timed according to sun, season, and ambient temperature. Every action, grinding grain, kneading dough, storing oil, is both labor and strategy, a careful negotiation between environmental pressures and human ingenuity. The auditory environment shapes daily life as much as visual cues. Courtyards amplify conversation and labor, narrow alleys channel movement, and thin walls transmit both warnings and guidance. Residents interpret these sounds to coordinate work, anticipate neighbors' needs, and maintain social cohesion. Sound acts as both information and social glue, binding the community together within the physical constraints of the architecture.
Seasonal shifts dictate profound changes in domestic routines. Summer heat pushes activity to shaded corners and rooftops. Winter cold concentrates families near fires. Rainstorms necessitate urgent wall repairs and roof reinforcement. The mud brick home, while resilient, remains vulnerable to neglect or environmental extremes. Continuous vigilance and adaptation are essential, embedding resilience into the rhythm of daily life. Health and hygiene are mediated by architectural features. Porous walls, shared spaces, and dense living quarters facilitate both communal care and disease transmission. Families develop practical strategies to monitor illness, provide treatment, and maintain sanitation, often aided by neighbors. Architecture is simultaneously protective and exposing, shaping behavior, routines, and social dynamics.
Even within these constraints, creativity and ritual flourish. Etched patterns, painted walls, small figurines, and carefully arranged household objects convey identity and cultural continuity. Courtyards host celebrations, work, and social interaction. Every repair, alignment of jars, or mat arrangement reflects ingenuity, memory, and adaptation. The home is a canvas where function, culture, and resilience intersect. As dusk falls, the settlement enters a quieter rhythm. Fires burn low, lamps flicker, and rooftops transform into sleeping platforms. Shadows stretch across walls, revealing textures, repairs, and traces of human life. Mud walls absorb and release heat, sound, and memory, mediating between inhabitants and their environment. Families settle into nightly routines of rest, vigilance, and reflection. In these intimate, adaptable structures, civilization endures, not through grand monuments, but through the fragile, persistent architecture of everyday life. Generations leave their mark in every layer of plaster, every repaired brick, and every worn floor. Fragile yet enduring, these homes encapsulate labor, ingenuity, culture, and survival. Civilization thrives not in monumental architecture, but in the intimate, resilient structures of daily life, where human skill and adaptation meet the relentless sun and biting cold.
As the sun climbs higher, the household enters a delicate dance with the environment. Mud brick walls radiate heat, floors absorb and reflect it, and every movement is carefully calculated to maintain comfort and efficiency. Women balance water jars while kneading dough. Children dart through narrow alleys and courtyards, and men patch walls, reinforce roofs, or adjust sunshades. Each action is informed by intimate knowledge of the house's behavior, how it cools, warms, or absorbs moisture, and the consequences of neglect are immediate and tangible. Courtyards act as multifunctional stages where life unfolds simultaneously. Grain is sorted, water distributed, and tools repaired, while children learn coordination and spatial awareness through play and observation. Roofs serve as workspaces, drying platforms, and sleeping areas, adapting to the sun's trajectory. Every square foot is purposeful, and every routine is intertwined with the physical properties of the mud brick structure. The house is a living, responsive partner in daily survival.
Children's learning is immersive and kinetic. Children's learning is immersive and kinetic. Carrying water, climbing ladders, assisting with repairs, all teach practical knowledge, responsibility, and problem solving. Mistakes carry immediate consequences, reinforcing lessons that textbooks could never convey. Observation, imitation, and guided participation ensure that each child internalizes both environmental understanding and social skills. By adulthood, these experiences translate into intuitive mastery of household management, survival strategies, and communal responsibilities.
Water management remains central to domestic life. Basins, jars, and channels are carefully maintained to prevent wall erosion and structural damage. water sharing strengthens social bonds, while scarcity tests ingenuity and cooperation. Timing, quantity, and flow must be monitored constantly, integrating environmental observation with inherited and experiential knowledge. Water is both a physical necessity and a social instrument, shaping interactions, labor, and household dynamics. Food storage and preparation require strategic foresight. Grains, legumes, fruits, and preserved goods are stored in clay jars, niches, and rooftop drying areas. Integrated kitchens demand careful fire management, ventilation, and smoke control. Meals are prepared and consumed according to environmental conditions, sun cycles, and seasonal variations. Every action, from grinding grain to storing oil, is a calculated measure to sustain life while minimizing risk. Survival is embedded in routine, observation, and skill. The acoustic environment plays a subtle but critical role. Courtyards amplify voices and labor. Narrow alleys channel sounds, and thin walls transmit conversation, warnings, and guidance. Residents use these cues to coordinate activities, monitor neighbors, and maintain community cohesion. Sound is functional, social, and deeply integrated into domestic life, enabling communication, coordination, and shared vigilance. Seasonal changes demand constant adaptation. Summer heat drives work to shaded areas and rooftops. Winter cold forces families toward fires, and storms require rapid repairs and reinforcement. Mud brick structures, resilient when maintained, are vulnerable to environmental extremes. Continuous monitoring, patching, and adaptation are essential, embedding resilience and resourcefulness into daily routines. Health and hygiene are inseparable from the architecture. Shared spaces, porous walls, and dense living quarters facilitate both care and vulnerability to disease. Families develop strategies to monitor and treat illness, maintain sanitation, and care for vulnerable members, often with neighborly support. The house mediates exposure, comfort, and survival, shaping behavior and routines as much as the people within it. Even amidst labor, creativity and ritual flourish. Etched patterns, painted walls, small figurines, and carefully arranged objects enrich functional spaces with cultural and personal expression. Courtyards and rooftops host celebrations, storytelling, and communal labor. Every act, repairing a wall, arranging jars, aligning mats, is an exercise in ingenuity, memory,
and adaptation. Life in mud brick homes is both practical and expressive, ephemeral and enduring.
As dusk settles, the settlement's rhythm shifts. Fires burn low, lamps flicker, and rooftops become sleeping platforms. Shadows stretch across textured walls, highlighting repairs, scratches, and traces of human labor. Mud absorbs and releases heat, sound, and memory, mediating between humans and environment. Families settle into routines of rest, vigilance, and preparation, maintaining continuity across generations. Civilization persists not in grandeur, but through the adaptive, intimate, and enduring architecture of everyday life.
Every brick, plaster layer, and floor surface holds stories of labor, ingenuity, and resilience. Fragile yet enduring, mud brick homes sustain life, culture, and social cohesion, proving that the persistence of civilization often resides in the delicate balance between human skill, communal cooperation, and environmental mastery. Here, under the relentless sun and biting cold, ordinary people built structures capable of withstanding both time and nature, leaving a legacy far more subtle, yet profoundly enduring than any monument of stone.
The late morning heat intensifies, pressing life into carefully measured routines. Courtyards, once bustling with activity, now offer only shaded corners for respite. Roofs become both workspaces and sanctuaries, capturing whatever faint breeze passes through narrow alleys. Children learn to time their play, moving from shadow to shadow, observing adults at work, repairing walls, hauling water, or tending to food. Every movement is purposeful, each step a small negotiation with the environment, balancing effort with the limitations imposed by mud brick architecture. Courtyards remain multifunctional arenas where domestic life unfolds. Grain is sorted, tools repaired, water distributed, and fabrics dried. Roofs double as sleeping platforms or drying areas. Every square foot serves a purpose, and every action contributes to the household's survival. The home is not a passive structure. It is an active participant, its physical properties shaping behavior and coordinating the flow of labor, education, and play. Children's education is inseparable from daily life. Carrying water teaches balance and foresight. Climbing ladders hones coordination, and participating in repairs instills problem-solving skills. Mistakes have immediate consequences. A spilled jar, a weakened wall,
a ruined batch of grain. But these lessons are internalized rapidly. Learning is immersive, practical, and continuous, embedding environmental awareness, social intelligence, and technical skill into every child. Water management remains central. Basins, jars, and channels are meticulously maintained to prevent erosion, structural damage, and spoilage. Sharing water strengthens social bonds, while mismanagement can create tension. The timing, quantity, and flow of water are observed and coordinated, blending inherited wisdom with immediate experience. Water is both a resource and a social instrument, influencing labor distribution, household cohesion, and the wider community. Food preparation and storage require constant attention. Grains, legumes, fruits, and oils are dried, stored, and rotated in clay jars, rooftop racks, and specialized niches. Kitchens, integrated into living spaces, demand careful management of fire, ventilation, and smoke. Meals are timed according to the sun, season, and ambient conditions. Every step, from grinding grain to storing provisions, is both labor and strategic planning, reflecting the skill and foresight necessary for survival in a fragile environment.
Sound shapes domestic life. Courtyards amplify voices, narrow alleys channel movement, and thin walls transmit both communication and warning. Residents interpret these auditory cues to coordinate labor, anticipate neighborly needs, and maintain social cohesion. Sound is functional and social, providing a continuous layer of communication and awareness within the community.
Seasonal variations dictate adaptation. Summer heat pushes activity to shaded areas and rooftops. Winter concentrates families near fires, and storms necessitate rapid repairs. Mud brick walls, though resilient when maintained, are vulnerable to extreme weather or neglect. Vigilance, adaptation, and improvisation are embedded into daily routines, reinforcing both skill and communal cooperation. Health and hygiene are shaped by architecture, shared spaces, porous walls, and densely populated areas facilitate both care and disease. Families develop strategies to monitor illness, provide treatment, and maintain cleanliness, often with help from neighbors. Architecture mediates exposure, comfort, and survival, influencing routines, behavior, and community structure. Creativity and ritual permeate domestic spaces. Etched patterns, painted walls, small figurines, and carefully arranged items bring identity, memory, and culture into functional structures. Courtyards and rooftops host work, play, and celebration, blurring the line between labor and leisure. Every repaired wall, aligned jar, or organized mat reflects ingenuity,
memory, and adaptation, transforming the home into a living testament to human resilience and cultural continuity.
As evening descends, the settlement's rhythm shifts. Fires burn low, lamps flicker in niches, and rooftops serve as sleeping platforms. Shadows stretch across walls, revealing textures, repairs, and traces of daily labor. Mud absorbs and releases heat, sound, and memory, mediating between human activity and environmental forces. Families settle into nightly routines of rest, vigilance, and reflection. Civilization persists not in monumental architecture, but in the adaptive, intimate, and enduring structures of everyday life.
Every brick, plaster layer, and floor surface bears witness to labor, ingenuity, and resilience. Fragile yet enduring, these mud brick homes sustain life, social cohesion, and culture. Civilization thrives not through monumental displays, but through ordinary human skill, communal cooperation, and the delicate balance between environmental mastery and survival. Under the relentless sun and biting cold, these structures preserve generations of experience, knowledge, and ingenuity, leaving a legacy of everyday endurance that endures far beyond their modest walls.
Night falls over the settlement, and a quiet stillness settles over the mud brick homes. Fires burn low, lamps flicker softly, and the rooftops, worn smooth by generations, host the sleeping bodies of children, adults, and elders alike. The day's labor leaves traces on walls, floors, and ceilings. Patches of plaster, small scratches, faded etchings, and carefully stacked jars. Every mark tells a story of human persistence, adaptation, and ingenuity. The homes themselves are a living archive, recording centuries of life under the relentless sun and biting cold.
The endurance of these structures is not a matter of grandeur or monumental design. There are no towering stone facades, no carved statues or decorative columns proclaiming power. Instead, their strength lies in the subtle, intimate intelligence of ordinary people. The knowledge of how mud behaves when mixed, dried, or layered. The understanding of water's flow and weight. The skill to organize space for work, rest, and social life. Every repair, every patch of plaster, every carefully positioned jar is an act of problem solving and resilience. These homes are the ultimate expression of functional beauty, architecture in service of life itself.
Inhabitants lived in constant dialogue with their environment. Heat, cold, rain, wind, and dust were never abstract challenges. They were daily partners, shaping routines, chore allocation, and household priorities. Courtyards dictated social interaction. Rooftops served as living and working spaces, and walls both protected and communicated. Children grew up learning the rhythms of these spaces intuitively, internalizing lessons of balance, coordination, and foresight. Adults continually adapted techniques, materials, and routines, ensuring the home could withstand both environmental stresses and the demands of everyday life.
Water, the lifeblood of survival, was central to every decision. Proper management could sustain a household for weeks. Neglect could quickly turn floors to mud, walls to rubble, or food to spoilage. Sharing water strengthened community bonds, while scarcity tested ingenuity and cooperation. Food preparation, storage, and cooking followed similarly intricate calculations, integrating environmental factors with human skill. Meals, often simple, were microcosms of the broader negotiation between life, labor, and architecture.
Health and hygiene were inseparable from the physical design of the home. Shared spaces, porous walls, and densely packed quarters facilitated both social cohesion and vulnerability to disease. Families developed practical knowledge to monitor illness, administer care, and protect the vulnerable. Architecture mediated exposure, comfort, and survival, demanding constant attention, vigilance, and adaptation. Within these structures, daily life was a continuous exercise in observation, judgment, and skill.
Despite these hardships, creativity and ritual flourished. Simple etchings, painted symbols, small altars, and carefully arranged household objects infused utilitarian spaces with identity, memory, and cultural expression. Courtyards and rooftops hosted work, play, storytelling, and celebrations. Every action, from repairing a wall to arranging jars or mats, was simultaneously practical and expressive. These homes were not merely shelters, they were stages for life, culture, and human ingenuity.
The architecture itself shaped the social fabric. Thin walls transmitted voices, footsteps, and warnings. Courtyards directed movement and interaction. Roofs served multiple roles, from drying and working spaces to sleeping platforms. Sound, light, and spatial arrangement mediated labor, play, and social cohesion. Residents learned to interpret these cues intuitively, navigating their environment with both physical dexterity and social intelligence. Civilization persisted within these structures not through hierarchy or opulence, but through coordination, skill, and shared knowledge. Generations passed, leaving their marks etched into walls, floors, and rooftops. The physical traces of life, Repairs, scratches, faded plaster stand as a record of endurance and adaptation. Mud brick homes, fragile yet resilient, practical yet expressive, encapsulate centuries of labor, ingenuity, and cultural continuity. They are living monuments to ordinary people whose persistence allowed communities to survive and thrive in extreme conditions.
At night, as the wind whispers across rooftops and shadows stretch long along courtyards, the settlement itself seems to breathe. Walls release stored heat, floors radiate the sun's energy, and the faint creak of timber and mud echoes the rhythm of life. These homes, humble yet profound, embody a partnership between humans and the environment. They demonstrate that survival is not merely about shelter, but about intelligence, foresight, and the ability to negotiate a complex, unpredictable world.
Looking back, it becomes clear that civilization often flourishes not in monumental stone, but in the fragile, intimate, and enduring architecture of daily life. Mud brick homes tell the story of human resilience, of adapting to heat and cold, managing scarce resources, raising children with practical wisdom, maintaining health, fostering creativity, and sustaining social cohesion. They reveal the extraordinary achievements embedded in ordinary existence.
In these structures, life is a dialogue between humans and nature, labor and adaptation, necessity and ingenuity. Every brick, every plaster patch, every rooftop mat is testimony to generations of survival and creativity. The relentless sun and biting cold were not merely adversaries, they were partners in a complex dance, shaping behavior, routines, and even social structures. The story of mud brick homes is ultimately a story of people who mastered the art of living within limits, transforming adversity into a legacy that endures in both material and cultural memory.
So, as you imagine these settlements under blazing suns or starry nights, take a moment to appreciate the subtle, enduring brilliance of ordinary lives carved into mud and sweat. Civilization is not always built of marble or gold. Sometimes it is built in dust, in water, in sun-baked bricks, quiet, resilient, and profoundly human. The legacy of these homes is not just their survival, but the testimony they offer that ordinary people, through labor, intelligence, and cooperation, can endure extreme conditions, sustain culture, and create a world that continues to inspire centuries later. Under the relentless sun and enduring cold, these mud brick homes whisper stories of resilience, creativity, and the remarkable capacity of humans to thrive against all odds